At 23 years old, just out of college, I am saddled with a staggering $210,000 in debt. Even more troubling is the apparent favoritism my parents show towards my twin sister, Sarah. When I finished high school, I was eager to study law and aimed to secure a scholarship. However, my parents, doubtful of my chances, urged me to take out student loans to cover the costs. Being under 20 at the time and unfamiliar with the intricacies of financial loans, I trusted their judgment and applied for the loans, with my parents handling most of the paperwork. I signed where they told me to, not fully understanding what I was getting into. Later, I learned that I had been awarded a partial scholarship. My parents reassured me that it would cover half of my tuition, and they would manage the rest. This scholarship meant I only needed a loan for half of the tuition fees. The university also provided support for meals and accommodation, along with quarterly scholarships, which further reduced my need for borrowed funds. Throughout my college years, I worked part-time at a cafe to support myself and rarely discussed financial matters at home. Over the same period, my parents hoped Sarah would either go to law school or choose a stable career, but she opted for a career in modeling. After graduation, I decided against pursuing further degrees and instead focused on gaining practical work experience. I started an internship at a law firm. It was then that I received a repayment notice from the bank for the $210,000 loan. Upon reviewing the details, I found discrepancies. The tuition for the 7 semesters I attended, even with interest, should have been less than $80,000. Yet, the amount demanded was double. Including what my parents said they contributed towards my dormitory expenses, the total didn't even reach $95,000. This left me questioning the discrepancy and where the rest of the money had gone. Upon realizing a full tuition fee of $210,000 had been charged to my account, I reached out to the bank for clarification. They informed me the total amount was withdrawn as a precaution in case my scholarship, which covered half of the tuition, failed to come through. This explanation puzzled me, as I knew the scholarship was also intended to cover additional expenses like meals and lodging. Despite my parents' justifications, I sensed dishonesty and decided to address the matter in person. Last weekend, during a visit, my persistent inquiries initially met with diversion, but eventually led to a confession after several back and forths. It was revealed that the surplus funds had been redirected to cover my sister Sarah's tuition fees. This revelation angered me, as it seemed to confirm a pattern of favoritism towards her. I argued that such overprotection was detrimental to her growth. In defense, my parents insisted on their equal love for both children. They explained that they hadn't planned to use my scholarship for Sarah, but her poor high school grades made her ineligible for a loan, and they had no other assets after using their home as collateral for my tuition. Determined, I declared that I would only pay $95,000, suggesting that Sarah and our parents should jointly cover the remaining $115,000. The following morning, my father sought a serious discussion, yet it circled back to the financial arrangements. He shared his parental duty to support both his children's futures, revealing that despite his financial sacrifices for Sarah's education, she chose a modeling career instead. My sarcastic inquiry about her achievements in that field was met with a negative response, although he expressed his non-interference in her pursuits. I regretted my sharp words, aware it was too late to retract them. I reiterated that bearing a $210,000 debt was unreasonable. My father countered by highlighting my stable income and the prospect of increased earnings as I moved to full-time employment, suggesting the loan repayment was manageable within my financial scope. When I questioned my father about the financial burden of the loan, he noted that at 23 years old and with a stable career ahead of me, I could feasibly pay off the loan in about 6 years, unlike my sister Sarah, whose future prospects were less certain. He argued that because of my secure financial standing, I should accept the responsibility for both our tuitions. However, I couldn't understand why my financial stability should obligate me to cover her expenses as well, especially given her uncertain career path. His reasoning further delved into traditional roles, suggesting that women needed to prepare to be good wives and mothers, a viewpoint I found frustratingly outdated and disagreed with vehemently. I was left doubting whether I should really pay the additional $115,000 for Sarah, questioning whether it was a genuine obligation or just an expectation because I was already earning. I sought advice from friends and classmates who had mixed reactions. Some felt that if Sarah was supposed to contribute, I should too. But most felt it was unfair to expect me to cover everything and believed Sarah should at least contribute partially. Interestingly, educational loans are usually tied directly to the student for whom they are intended and cannot be transferred to another person. Typically, these funds are deposited directly into the university's account, and any excess is given to the student for personal expenses like meals, lodging, and textbooks. Given the financial aid I received, much of my living expenses were supposed to be managed through part-time work. However, unbeknownst to me at the time, my parents withdrew the remaining $115,000 from my personal bank account and redirected it to Sarah. This was possible because they had access to my account since I was 20 and not fully aware of how banking transactions worked. In retrospect, my lack of banking knowledge and oversight was a mistake. It was only after doing some online research and questioning my parents further that I began to uncover the depth of their actions regarding the withdrawal of these funds. It became evident that they had not only withdrawn the money, but had also utilized it in ways I was initially unaware of. This revelation highlighted the complexities of familial financial responsibilities and the importance of transparency and consent in such matters. Despite my parents' claims, there was never a situation where the expenses actually amounted to $115,000. In a shocking revelation, they admitted to fabricating fake invoices to justify the withdrawals. They insisted that they had no other choice, but that wasn't true. There were indeed other options available that didn't involve dipping into my funds. Several times, I found myself so angry that I considered moving out, but I soon realized that leaving wouldn't solve the real issue. The loan was under my name, and any default would harm my credit, not theirs. The financial burden, therefore, was mine to bear, and I made it clear to them that they needed to be ready to cover the $115,000 if Sarah failed to repay it. My mother tried to guilt me by saying that as their only daughter, it was my duty to look after the family and Sarah. She even compared me to other relatives who had financially supported their parents by buying houses or cars, criticizing me for not contributing in a similar manner. This argument baffled me. Does being their only daughter imply that Sarah isn't also their daughter? I was frustrated by their flawed logic. I had initially kept Sarah out of these discussions, but my parents insisted on shielding her from any stress related to our financial issues. They claimed she was dealing with mental instability from the pressures of her work and current situation. Yet, contradictorily, she seemed cheerful on her social media, regularly posting pictures of herself at parties with friends. My parents defended this by saying she needed to maintain a happy facade online to build a celebrity persona, which I found completely unreasonable. Eventually, I decided it was crucial to involve Sarah directly in the financial conversation. It was time to stop excessively coddling her. That night, I waited up for her, knowing she usually came home after midnight. With my parents asleep, I saw it as the perfect moment to confront her about the situation and discuss everything openly, hoping to find a way forward together. When I heard the sound of Sarah's car pulling up, I grabbed some ice cream and pretended to be casually enjoying it, hoping to make our encounter seem like just a coincidence. As she walked in, I offered her a spoonful and casually began chatting about things that might interest her, like recent tales about our cousins and neighbors. I even sprinkled in some gossip about her school friends, hoping to make the atmosphere relaxed and friendly. Despite our lack of closeness, partly due to how our parents had pampered her, I wanted our interaction to be natural and not strained. During our conversation, I casually inquired about her work, trying to gauge if she faced any challenges. She appeared to be doing well professionally, so I shifted the topic to her personal development and any new skills she might have picked up to chase her dreams. Her answer was a simple no. Then, I cautiously brought up the subject of the $115,000, asking how she had spent the money. She seemed taken aback and claimed ignorance about the funds. I clarified that I was referring to the student loan and probed her on its use. Contrary to my fear of frivolous expenditures like cosmetic surgeries, she confessed that the money went towards funding lavish parties and vacations with friends, a revelation that left me dismayed. I had maintained my composure until then, but learning how she had carelessly squandered such a significant amount sparked my anger. I couldn't fathom her disregard for the financial burden she placed on our family, and my frustration was evident. Sarah defensively retorted that it had nothing to do with me, and argued that I shouldn't expect her to repay money that was spent frivolously. Our discussion quickly escalated into a heated argument. Our rising voices eventually woke our parents, who rushed in to diffuse the tension. They reprimanded me, questioning why I would confront Sarah so harshly and press her about the money. In their eyes, I was at fault for creating conflict, and when I questioned their continual indulgence in her behavior, they dismissed it as a mere financial issue. But for me, the real problem wasn't just the money. It was Sarah's reckless spending and her apparent lack of remorse. Normally, I would have remained quiet, but this situation demanded confrontation. This time, I couldn't hold back. When I confronted my parents about Sarah's misuse of the funds, they attempted to pacify me, suggesting we discuss it calmly the next morning. However, I demanded an immediate resolution and adamantly refused to cover Sarah's extravagant expenses. Sarah retorted dismissively, claiming that as long as her tuition was paid, the rest was her concern. She pointed out that since the loan was in my name, she wasn't legally responsible, which was technically true. Feeling utterly defeated and realizing I had reached my breaking point, I insisted that either they or Sarah should pay for these frivolous expenses. Then, I stormed out and spent the night at a college friend's place. The following morning, I returned to my dorm without speaking to anyone. The previous advice from the bank officer, whom I had initially contacted, proved invaluable. He was supportive and explained the loan process in detail. After my intense conflict, I consulted him again, and he helped me discover that the invoices had been falsified and the funds withdrawn fraudulently. He mentioned that I could potentially sue my parents over this, but first I needed to gather all the original documents. Since I was planning to move from the dorm to an apartment post-graduation and had already started packing, finding these documents wouldn't be straightforward. I spent several days meticulously searching through emails and various apps to locate all the necessary invoices. A few days later, I presented copies of these documents to my parents. Under normal circumstances, this might have brought me some relief, but the overwhelming anger and sense of betrayal persisted. I couldn't forgive them for their disregard and manipulation. Determined to make a stand and do something they would never expect, I resolved to take decisive action. This meant potentially pursuing legal avenues to address the fraudulent use of my loan, a move I knew they would dread but one I felt necessary to protect my financial future and hold those responsible accountable. After discovering the extent of the misuse of funds, I sent Sarah excerpts from legal provisions related to loan fraud, detailing the severe penalties and charges for fraud if the misused amount between $80,000 and $115,000 was not repaid. I made it clear to her that I had all the original invoices and wouldn't hesitate to take legal action against our parents to rectify the situation. Sarah didn't respond directly to my warnings. Later, I received a voicemail from my father. I chose not to answer his call, so he left a message instead, accusing me of shirking my responsibilities towards my sister and acting out of greed. Despite our closeness in age, just 3 minutes apart, his words stung because had Sarah used the money responsibly or shown any remorse for her actions, I might have been more inclined to negotiate. However, her apparent pride in her frivolous spending left me dismayed. I shared the message I had sent to Sarah with my parents, which prompted a sharp reply from my mother, labeling me as greedy, stubborn, and selfish. Unmoved by their accusations, I stood firm, insisting that they needed to pay the amount owed. After several intense discussions and exchanges of blame, my father requested time to assess their financial situation and promised to get back to me. A week passed without any follow-up, leaving me to contemplate the necessity of my threats to sue, which might have seemed harsh, but felt like my only viable option. I could not afford to shoulder this financial burden alone. The funds were part of the savings I had carefully managed up to that point. I issued another stern warning to my parents. They must pay the $115,000 or face a lawsuit for fraud. More than a month has gone by since my last contact with my parents. Although there was an 8-month grace period before loan repayments needed to begin, I had already secured a job and started making payments. This was now my third loan installment, and it would still take a long time to pay off even half of it. The situation remained unresolved, and the strain on our family relationships deepened. Despite the challenging circumstances, I still needed to pay off the remaining half of the loan. In an attempt to clarify their stance, I sent another message to my father, but received no response. Unexpectedly, a few days later, my parents and Sarah turned up at my apartment. I tried calling my father to discuss things calmly, but instead, my mother started shouting at me in the hallway, accusing me of being shameless. They had indeed provided me with a good education, but I wanted to avoid causing a scene in my neighborhood, so I invited them inside. Once we were indoors, Sarah joined my mother in berating me, hurling spiteful accusations. I couldn't hold back and confronted Sarah about her reckless spending of such a significant sum of money, insisting that she needed to repay it. Sarah retorted that she hadn't directly asked for the money and argued that since our parents had given it to her willingly, she felt no obligation to repay it. This rationale seemed utterly unreasonable to me. Amidst the heated argument, my mother tried to pressure me by reminding me that they had mortgaged the house for my future. Losing my patience, I responded sharply, suggesting they should let the bank auction the house to settle the debt, if that's what it took. This stark statement made them realize the seriousness of my intentions. The persuasion halted abruptly, and they left my apartment without another word. About a month later, I reached out to my father once more to remind him of the outstanding payment. He explained that he was planning to partition part of the house for rental to generate income, hoping to alleviate Sarah's financial burden and contribute towards repaying the loan. While it was regrettable that the house needed to be modified for these reasons, I felt strongly that the responsibility should fall on Sarah. She often blamed me for devaluing the property, but I could no longer accept such accusations. Currently, I was the one burdened with the loan payments, and I was determined to ensure that they acknowledged and addressed the financial responsibilities that were rightfully theirs. When I spoke with the bank branch manager about the loan terms, he informed me that there was no other option available. $10,000 was still outstanding, and it would take 4 years to repay it completely. During this period, my parents were given a grace period to gather the necessary funds. Hopefully, by the end of these 4 years, they could provide the money required. Over these 4 years, my life has seen remarkable changes. I am now working as a corporate lawyer in the US and have recently gotten engaged to my college sweetheart. We plan to get married next year. I am grateful for having managed to pay off the loan and for my career success, but it saddens me deeply that my relationship with my parents has deteriorated further. Initially, my father agreed to rent out part of our house and use the rental income to help pay off Sarah's portion of the loan. Payments were made regularly at first, but as soon as my father discovered that I had secured a high-paying job, he stopped making them. He occasionally blamed delayed rent payments from tenants or cited rising medical expenses for my mother and his own business debts as reasons for these delays. For the past 3 years, he has used various excuses to defer payments, leaving me as the sole contributor. My fiancé revealed that Sarah wasn't solely dependent on our parents for financial support. This intrigued me, and when I pressed him for details, he pointed out that my mother and Sarah consistently showcased expensive designer clothing and jewelry at family gatherings. He even provided photos of them at several events as evidence. These photos made it painfully clear that my parents still viewed me primarily as a financial resource, which deepened my disappointment and mistrust. Unable to contain my frustration any longer, I sent my father a final ultimatum, declaring that if they failed to meet their obligations, I would take legal action. Determined to resolve this matter swiftly, I leaned heavily on my fiancé for support. Given that his sister is a police officer, he consulted her and enlisted her professional help. She promptly contacted my parents, warning them that I was prepared to file a police report if the outstanding payments were not made soon. This firm stance was a tough but necessary step to protect my financial future and hold my family accountable for their commitments. As the situation escalated, it became evident that this was primarily a civil matter, not a criminal one. To avoid the complications of court proceedings, my parents looked for an informal resolution. Despite the deep discomfort I felt in taking such drastic steps, I was left with no other choice. Eventually, my father reluctantly agreed to resume and complete the payments. However, once the loan was fully settled, my father sent me a stern letter, painfully declaring his decision to disown me. The letter bluntly stated, "Never contact us again." This sudden and harsh rejection from my own family left me utterly shocked and heartbroken. I broke down in tears. During this incredibly tough time, my fiancé was my rock. He comforted me, assuring me that their actions stemmed from greed and spite, not from any fault of my own. The pain of being treated in such a way by my own family was overwhelming. Amidst my tears, I battled with feelings of guilt and even contemplated returning the money they had paid just to ease the situation. However, as I began to regain my composure, I came to a painful realization. No matter how much I tried to help and please them, my parents would likely never feel any remorse for their actions. This realization sparked a significant change within me. I found the strength to live my life unaffected by the criticisms or harsh judgments of others, learning to value my well-being and the new family I was building with my fiancé. Moving forward, I embraced the freedom and peace that came with accepting that I could not change their views, only how I responded to them.